Well, hello, sister travelers. If you're a regular listener, you may have heard me mention probably a month or so ago that I was headed to do a solo trip to Big Bend National Park here in Texas. And today I'm going to share my experience there, give you a little tips on what to do if you plan to go, and even a bit of an itinerary sharing what I did while I was there at Big Bend National Park in Texas, here in the USA. Welcome to Solo Travel Adventures, my sisters. Don't let fear hold you back from traveling alone. I want you to gather your courage, listen to inspiring stories, and learn how to travel solo while safely navigating new places from this show. I'm Cheryl Esch, solo travel advocate and travel coach, and I want you to have a transformative experience when you travel solo. So pack your bags, book your flight, and check one more time for that passport. It's time to explore the world. Well, if you're from the U.S., you know that we have 63 national parks here in the U.S., and they are vastly different, but they're all phenomenal. I have not been to all of them. My goal one day is to reach all of them, but on my list, of course, since I've lived in Texas for about 14 years, I thought it was due time for me to get to, there's 2 national parks here in the state of Texas. So the first one I hit in October was Big Bend National Park. Now, Big Bend is far west Texas, a little south from where I am. I'm in Dallas, so it's a good 8-hour drive, and there's really no easy way to get there. They call it Splendid isolation for a reason. It is 800,000 acres of land it's a geographic marvel of, you go from vast desert landscapes to rocky, mountain ridges, and just there's carved out canyons near the border of Mexico, and it is considered the 15th largest national park in the U.S. So there's lots to see. I will tell you, basically, if you are a hiker, this is the place to go. There are a lot of other parks too that have lots of hiking, but this park actually has 200 miles of different trails that you can do, and they're quite challenging, believe it or not. You think desert, well, that can be kind of challenging in the summer with the sweltering heat, but then you have these mountain ridges where you have to climb. There is one of the Emery Peak is actually almost 8,000 feet. So we talk about those high peak climbs, and that would be one to try to conquer. I did not get to that one. And, there's just lots to do there as far as just getting outdoors and seeing nature and the fauna. There's just so many different plants that even though I've lived in Texas, that you just don't have, right? We don't have in Dallas, and you won't have anywhere else. It's just very different than what you might be used to seeing. So I'm going to also share the best time to go is spring and fall. You could also go in the winter. Their busiest time actually is November through April. And the hottest month they say is June. But I imagine July and August, especially in the desert plain areas, like if you're doing any of those types of hikes. Now, if you're doing the mountain hikes, it does get cooler, of course, as you know, as you climb higher up. But those would be also additionally, hot months. And October, I think, I went in October. I thought it was delightful. I think it's the perfect month to go. It may also be a little busy, but I didn't find it overly busy, to be honest. And the weather was ideal. It was 80s the first day I was there, and like high 70s or so the other 2 days I was there. And of course the evenings dropped down to pretty cool 50s maybe when I was there. So to me that's perfect, ideal, even ideal camping weather to me. So yeah, so you get there. How do you get there? Well, you have to drive. It is far, and there's nothing close by. So Some of the things I recommend even before you go, like some important considerations because of the isolation of the park. One, you really want to get a full tank of gas before driving into the park. And for me, coming from the north end of the state and the north entrance, there was a city called Marathon. It's about 1 hour from the entrance, and that is where you will need to fill up your gas tank. Now, there is a gas station, a very small one, inside the park, but they of course charge an exorbitant amount of money per gallon, and that's for a reason, because it's really hard and isolated for those gas tankers, I guess, to get there. So definitely fill up your gas tank, because even the 3 days I was driving around the park, because the park is so huge, I essentially used up almost a full tank of gas. So you want to make sure you have that full tank of gas before you go into the park. Number 2, bring supplies, meaning food, water, and if you plan to camp, make sure you have all the supplies you need. They do have some visitor centers and camping supply place stuff there, but it is limited. So bring your own stuff, lots of food and water. There's not a whole lot of places to eat. I'll get to that in a moment. Number 3, I'd say definitely get yourself a paper map of the park. That's something you can get at the entrance or even maybe beforehand, because GPS doesn't always work, especially when you're in those valleys or even the mountains. It's really hard to get any kind of service there. Matter of fact, the only time I was able to get service was at the visitor centers. So just keep that in mind. It's a great place and great time to disconnect and untether maybe from the distractions of your phone. But to get there, of course, you do need to drive. There's no public transportation. There's no trains. It's just really remote. But the closest airports, if you are flying and you don't live in Texas, is Midland, Odessa, which is 235 miles from the north entrance, and then El Paso, it's 330 miles from an entrance. There are only 2 entrances into the park. The first one is the north entrance. So like if you're driving, maybe you're driving from Austin, you could also fly into Austin, a little different drive, but you could do that. It is a bigger airport by chance. So Persimmon Gap is the north entrance, and that's the one I came in from. And then there's the Maverick Entrance, which is the west entrance, and it's near Terlingua, the town of Terlingua, which is quite an interesting little town. There's stuff to do there as well. Once you enter the north entrance, I will tell you, there is nothing for about, I think it's 27 miles from the entrance of the north side to get to the visitor center. And that first visitor center that you run into kind of almost in the center of the park is called Panther Junction. There are 5 visitor centers in the park, but that's the first one you'll reach if you come in from the north. And it's 27 miles of just vast desert. There's nothing. So if you have to go to the bathroom, there is a bathroom at the entrance when you first come in. And there's also restrooms at all the visitor centers otherwise. But and you can only go, I'm trying to remember I think it's only 40 miles per hour is the speed limit. So you can't go real fast. So it takes, almost, I don't know, it took me, to get from one point to another point in the park, it would often take an hour just to get to one place to the other because of the slow driving. And if you plan to stop along the way and, take in the scenery, that's going to take a little extra time as well. And I encourage that, because you're going to see a lot of formations, of rock formations along the way. You're going to see, you come certain times, you might see the sunrise or the sunset over the ridge, and that is absolutely stunning. The second visitor center that is the most populated one is the Chisos Basin Visitor Center, and that is where the lodge is. And that is actually, you talk about where to stay, that is one of the only places that has, regular accommodations. So we'll get that in a second. But there are 3 other visitor centers. Actually, two other ones. I already mentioned Persimmon Gap. There's Panther Junction and then Chisos Basin Visitor Center. That's the big one. That's also where almost all the trailheads are for any kind of hiking that you may want to do. Most of them start there. There is Castellón Visitor Center. It's actually closed in the summer. It was not open when I went. And then there's the Rio Grande Village. That's on the far southeast of the east part of the park. It also has an RV campsite there. So speaking of places to stay, if you're not you don't have an RV, or you're not into camping, or you don't like tents, then you're going to want to stay at the Chisos Mountain Lodge. It's the only accommodations that you can get inside the park. Otherwise, you're spending a lot of time driving in and out because there aren't really any close towns to the park at all. So there's some RV campgrounds. There's also some tent campgrounds. And then if you really like, the backcountry, there's some backcountry campsites. And all of those can be booked online. You can actually go to Big Bend National Park, their website, through the National Park Services. And there are links within that to those various places where you can book online. And those do fill up fast, especially the lodge, during those busy seasons. Okay, so especially, believe it or not, during Thanksgiving, they say it books up pretty quickly. I would imagine November would also be a spectacular month to go to the park. So now the backcountry campsites, you have to really like hiking and roughing it, right? Because there is no water sources in many of those backcountry sites. And there's also no bathroom. So there are some that might have, maybe just a bathroom facility, possibly. But a lot of those backcountry ones, you have to hike inward into the backcountry for several miles before you actually get to maybe your campsite. And there are lots of wildlife. So, when I was there, one of the backcountry campsites encountered a bear. People that I also ran into had said they saw a bear on one of their hikes. The bear actually, because someone had left their food out, as you know, you can't leave food out because bears are enticed by that, and they didn't put it in a bear can, were disruptive in that campsite. So, the ranger was actually warning some people that morning that I was hanging out about the bear sighting and incident they had the night before at one of those backcountry campsites. So, it's up to you what you like to do if you really like roughing it, but make sure you go prepared, as I mentioned before. So there's things to do there. There's just hiking mostly, or some scenic drives that you could do for sure. As like I said, there's 200 miles of trails. Here's my recommendations of some great trails that you could do. There are some challenging trails for sure, but there are a couple easy ones that I'll mention as well. And so these are actually all the trails I did while I was there, and I did break it up into 3 days of doing these trails. So the Lost Mine Trail is actually very close to the Chisos Basin Visitor Center. It's not far from there. Parking is limited, they say, so you might have to park along the street or get there rather early. I would say get there early, especially if it's a warm day. I made the mistake of kind of arriving right at high noon, and it was rather warm. It was in the 80s that day, but it is a 4.8 mile round trip up the whole way. It is rather rocky. It's doable. They say on all trails it would take you 2.5 hours. Well, it took me 3, and I would consider myself a moderate hiker. Not slow, but also not too fast. I would recommend hiking poles. I did it without, but was kind of regretting that I left them in my car. So some people did it with, some without. It just, if you do have some knee issues, the poles may help with some of those rocky areas, but definitely worth it. There's lots of scenic overlooks on the way up, and once you get to the top, even more so. And I saw some painter on my way up that had set up his easel to catch some great landscapes, and there was some professional photographers that were doing, just some wonderful capture of some pictures. So it's very lovely trail. It winds up, a lot of switchbacks, but it's very rocky. And then later that day, after I got kind of settled in, there's the Window Trail, which is right, again, the trailhead is right there at the visitor center at Chisos Basin. And it is 5.5 miles round trip, and it winds around. And when you get to the end or at the beginning, you could either not do the whole trail and just do that, what we call the Window View Trail, which is a very short little paved trail. You can watch the sunset there at that trailhead. So I recommend. It was beautiful to see the sunset between the rocks. So there's the rock formations kind of create this little window view where you can catch the western sky. And lots of people gather, so get there early. But the other thing is, because it's getting to be dusk when that happens, do not forget your bug spray, because they will come out and eat you. The next day, I did the classic, very famous Santa Elena Canyon Trail. And this is the infamous trail that you probably see pictures of people. It's where the border of Mexico and the U.S. are. And it's a beautiful canyon where the river has carved out this space. And so it's 2 miles round trip approximately. It was 2 miles for me because I had to walk further down the creek area, because you must cross the creek to get to the other side, to get to the trail. And depending on the time of year, that creek, Terlingua Creek, can be dry, or it can, have water in it. And there were parts of the creek further down that were just muddy. And so I was able to cross at that area instead of actually having to go through the water. But typically people do, they'll climb through the water to get up to the other side. But it was a beautiful view. You walk all the way pretty much to the end, and you see the other side is Mexico. It's a relatively, you go up go up some stairs, but it's a pretty gentle hike as you weave your way through, and right on the edge of the river basin there, you will walk, right? So it's absolutely lovely, very picturesque place. I highly recommend it, and see if you can find a dry spot to cross over it. You may have to walk a little further down the creek to find it, but definitely worth it. So I didn't want to have muddy boots, because I did do another hike a little later that day. I did try to do part of the Boot Canyon Trail, and this is 3.5 miles, but then it continues on 2.8 more miles to the south rim. Now, I didn't get all the way through. I probably only got about 2.5 miles, maybe 3 miles. I obviously didn't continue to the south rim. This one was also very challenging. It was a lot of uphill and not as rocky as the Lost Mine Trail, though, but definitely just a lot of climbing on that one. So definitely, again, make sure you have lots of water. And I liked being challenged in these trails for sure. In my drive, I also came across the Sam Nail Ranch, and it's a short little pleasant. There's like a windmill there, just a little place to maybe find some solitude. And so driving around, you're going to find lots of little pockets of places that you might be able to pull off and just adore the outside, the environment. Now on day 3, I did a hike that I definitely recommend, but depending on what kind of vehicle you have, you're going to want to make sure you have a vehicle that maybe has 4-wheel drive or at least a high clearance, because the drive to get into the trail, it's a 6.3 miles on gravel, and you really can't go any faster than about 15 miles an hour because there's a lot of dips and holes and rocks that you have to drive over. So definitely want to have. I was very lucky to have my Jeep. I was so happy I had it. I had my windows down and was driving nice and slowly across those bumps, but it was definitely worth the drive in to this hike. Now the hike itself, it's called the Balancing Rock Hike, and it's off of Grapevine Hills Trail, and it's only 2.2 miles round trip. It's very flat and easy in the beginning, but then at the last quarter mile, you have to scramble up the rocks to get to the Balancing Rock Formation, but it's definitely worth it. You probably don't need your poles on this one because of the scrambling part. You really can't use your poles. And in the flat part, you really don't need them. But on this hike, I actually got to see some rams in the high rocky parts of the plateaus that are there, just kind of hanging out and climbing up those side of the rocks there, which was quite amazing. I was kind of excited to see that. It was something I know my father used to do, and so to see that live was actually quite just seeing any kind of wildlife and all the different plants that they have. It's phenomenal. It's just definitely different than what you might be used to depending on where you travel. So sisters, if you're considering a national park, if you're from the US, then that's something you can probably more easily get to. If you're coming from another country, just don't forget that in the US, we have lots of great national parks. And so depending on where you're traveling to in the US, you likely can find a national park. We have 63 throughout the country that you can get to explore. And if you like being out in nature, of course, I highly recommend it. And even when I'm in other countries, for example, when I was in Ireland, I did find myself in a national park there, which was so lovely. And I do like to explore those areas. And if that's you, then look into just different national parks. They don't have to be in the US, but see if there's one in the country where you're going to visit and maybe explore and go on a hike. It's lovely to get out into nature. But what I want to say about my experience at Big Bend was it was exactly what I needed at the right time. And often our solo trips and travel, provide us with what we need, especially if we go in sort of with that mindset that this trip and a lot of the solo trips I have done have provided some sort of healing in a sense, in some way, whether it's just finding that restoration of having that solitude time, to maybe even healing emotionally because you're away from those distractions or that situation itself. So that's why one of the reasons I strongly encourage solo travel for women, because it offers so much more than just getting to see a different destination. There are physical, emotional, and mental positive benefits to it as well. And so I hope you will get out there and explore on your own, find that solo adventure that fills you and gives you what you need at that moment, whether it's, solitude, whether it's exploration, or whether it's adventure. And maybe it's a physical healing as well. And you can find that often in solo trips as well, because you can go at your own pace and you can do what your body needs to have done, whether it's maybe physically moving or maybe just chilling out on a beach, right? And it's okay to do that as well. Our bodies will tell us what they need. And so I hope that you will, as you plan your trips, your solo trips, that you will listen to what those needs are for you at that season in your life. And so sisters, in the meantime, Get out there and have an adventure. Hey, sister travelers, did this podcast inspire and encourage you or move you to get out there and travel? Wonderful. There are 3 ways you can thank me. First one is leave a written review for the show on Apple Podcast. 2, share the show with your sister travelers, your friends, your family. And 3, subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. And thank you again for listening to the show. Sisters, be fearless, take the leap, and get out there and have an adventure.